Welcome, everyone. My name is Corinne, and I will be your moderator this evening. I'm excited to welcome Jim Brady, Senior Director with Henry Schein Financial Services, as our speaker this evening for valuable insights into the big three indicators that can signal your practice is ready for expansion. Before we get started, I would just like to take a moment to go over some quick housekeeping. If you have a question, please type it in the Q&A section and we will be answering questions live at the end of the webinar. CE is not available for this webinar live or on demand. Jim, welcome and thank you for being with us tonight. I'll pass it on over to you now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Corinne. Appreciate it. So let's get started. So as Corinne mentioned, my name is Jim Brady. I'm the Senior Director of Sales for Henry Schein Financial Services. And again, just like Corinne did, I'll thank you all for attending tonight's webinar as part of Henry Schein's Dental Academy. I'm excited to go through the content with you. It's a topic that we actually have not offered yet, so you will be the first to go through this. And then before we really jump in, for those of you who don't know, I'll give you a little bit of background on Henry Schein Financial Services. So my team provides a complete set of financial solutions to our customers, really leveraging that power of Henry Schein. So really whether you're looking to simply obtain a loan for a single piece of equipment or taking on a larger project like an expansion, which is why we're here tonight, I encourage you to reach out. I've got a team of industry experts that are ready to help with all your practice finance needs. My contact information is on the next slide, which I'll go to now. So please don't hesitate to reach out. As Corinne mentioned, we'll take some Q&A after we've gone through the presentation. So please feel free to reach out with questions then or afterwards after we're done tonight. So again, thanks for joining. We'll get started. So first, let's review kind of why we're here. Corinne gave you a little bit of an intro, but first and foremost, we want to review some of the key performance indicators that you can look at that may signal you're ready to expand, right? Then we're going to get into what you should be focusing on if and when you are ready to expand, really centered around what we call our financial checkup. And as part of that financial checkup, we'll discuss selecting the right lender for your project, the importance of a true pre-approval, and building a business plan. We've spent a lot of time here at Henry Schein Financial Services developing a business plan template that you can utilize, and I'll walk you through some of the components of that. And then I'll take you through some basic calculations that you can utilize to assess the return on investment for your expansion, or really for anything, whether you're purchasing a piece of equipment or taking on a larger expansion or relocation. And then lastly, as we always do in most of these types of webinars, we'll discuss the importance of building the right team around you. Taking on an expansion or a project or a relocation or a startup or really anything at this point can be a daunting task. So you don't need to be the expert. That's what your team is for. We want to spend some time talking about making sure you're building the right team. All right. So I do want to jump right back into this, but rather than do that, we're going to take a quick poll, and Corinne's going to help me with this, utilizing the fancy polling questions that Zoom has available. So you should see a poll pop up on the screen. And I do this just so I make sure I understand really who we're talking to and what you're looking to do to make sure we tailor this appropriately. The first question is simply kind of try to identify how you're related to the practice. Are you a dentist? Are you a practice owner, a non-dentist, an office manager, or somebody else? And then secondly, where are you really in your expansion journey? Are you considering expanding or your existing location, expanding to a satellite location, starting a new practice from scratch, or something else altogether? So we'll give that a couple of seconds. I know there's a little bit of a lag with the Zoom polling feature. So we'll give that a couple of minutes, or excuse me, a couple of seconds. And then Corinne, if you wouldn't mind, give me a brief snapshot because I can't see the polling results. So I know kind of how we can dive in here.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting lots of engagement. So thank you, everyone.
Great.
Results are still coming in, but it's pretty much split neck and neck between our audience being either a dentist or an office manager. It's about
Great.
half and half right now. And 83% of the audience is considering expanding an existing location.
Fantastic. That's the perfect market that we're looking to talk to tonight, and that's exactly what we've tailored the presentation to. I always just like to confirm that before we dive in and spend another 50 minutes talking about something that maybe I'll think somebody else is not here for. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. And with that, we will dive in. All right. So as the name of the webinar implies, let's first discuss some of the KPIs or key performance indicators that may signal you're ready to expand. The first is really all about revenue, okay? And when we talk about revenue, I'm talking about the gross receipts that you charge, less, of course, any contractual disallowances from insurance companies that you may be taking. We tend to see that GP practices or general practices start to reach capacity once they're doing around $350,000 or $400,000 in gross revenue per op. Now, there's a lot of variables that go into this number. So like a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight, this is a rule of thumb, not the letter of the law. And these numbers are going to vary depending on a multitude of factors, right? So your location in the country, your fee schedule, your payer mix, your procedure mix, the list goes on and on and on, which can drastically swing these numbers one way or the other. Because there's so many variables, perhaps it's more important to look at this a few different ways. So it's potentially easy to make the decision to expand if you're literally busting at the seams, right? You're running 4 to 5 chairs a week, you're offering Saturday hours, you've clearly optimized your space, then yes, time to build out another op or consider a satellite location. The other view is you have a desire or really a need to increase your profitability. If a practice is leaning towards the higher end of the average per op, but revenue and profitability has really grown stagnant, this is really an altogether different situation. You might find this a bit kind of counterintuitive, saying, if the practice is flat in revenue, why would I expand? But if the goal is to drive additional profitability and the ROI is there, which we'll get to how to calculate that towards the end of the presentation, then expansion may actually be the answer. The other piece related to revenue is kind of your need or desire to add additional treatment options to your practice. So certainly to drive revenue, but also, as we're all here, to improve patient satisfaction and outcomes. So oftentimes just your desire to add additional treatment options requires the need for not only additional equipment, but in turn, that additional equipment typically requires more room, which in turn leads to expansion. So that obviously can be a good indicator that yes, it's time to expand your existing location. Additionally, if you're referring out a significant amount of a certain procedure or procedures that you actually could be doing in-house if you had the right equipment or the right training or even the appropriate amount of space, that's a good signal that it may be time to expand. So referring out procedures that you could keep in-house obviously not only hurts your bottom line, it may impact your active patient count as well. So if you consider that, okay, I'm referring out a patient, that patient that you refer not only gains visibility and treatment from your competitors, but there's a potential that they may not actually return, even if you have a good relationship with your referral base. Okay, so those are some kind of high-level revenue metrics and signals that it may be time to consider an expansion, be that in your existing location or opening a second satellite location or third. All right. There's a few other metrics kind of or signals that we're going to discuss. Not so much centered around revenue, but centered around new patient acquisition and scheduling. So another rule of thumb, and depending on your practice, this again, potentially dangerous figure to throw out there because it is just a rule of thumb and these numbers vary widely, but you should be generating between 10 to 25 new patients per month. Again, potentially dangerous to throw out there because it can vary. Many years ago, one of the major practice finance lenders did some research into this area and found that around 10% of patient attrition is actually normal in a practice. So as we all know, patients move, they stop seeking treatment, they find new providers, all kinds of different reasons that they may leave. This means you always have to be soliciting new patients, not just to grow, but to maintain revenue. So we find if you're getting that 10 to 25 new patient per month threshold, again, this is the average GP practice in the US, you're likely in a place that can support expansion, assuming your revenue targets have been reached. So similar to the last slide and the last metrics, there's a bunch of different ways to look at this as well. So a good way to review kind of is how far in advance you're booked, right? So how long does it take for a new patient to be scheduled or an existing patient to be scheduled for a recall appointment? If you're booking out more than 2-3 weeks to obtain an appointment, that also may be a good indicator that it's time to hire additional staff or expand, be that an assistant, hygienist, or even a part-time associate. The inverse to the new patient growth, of course, is churn or attrition. You see that you actually are able to attract new patients, but not retain those patients. Again, potentially another signal that it may be time to remodel or expand. So a cramped dated practice really deters patients from returning, no matter the quality of care, no matter how long they've been coming to that practice. So another great indicator that it may be time to expand. There's really lots of different signals that it may be time to expand. These are just a couple. And again, I'll preface this with rules of thumb, which may not always be the best indicators, but can give you an idea of where you stand compared to some of your peers. It's always important to work with your advisors to determine when an expansion makes sense and or is appropriate for you, depending on your specific situation. The good news is, overall, it continues to be a phenomenal time to be a dentist, right? So demand for dentistry continues to increase. We've all seen this time and time again. This is also a largely recession-resistant business. So while demand continues to increase, the landscape of the industry continues to evolve as well, which means there's all the more reason to ensure that you are constantly evolving and upgrading your practice. So those are just a couple of the metrics or signals that it may be time to start to look to expand your practice. So let's assume you've made that decision and you want to go ahead and expand. So now what? It's really important to assess kind of the health of your finances. And when I say the health of your finances, it's not just your personal finances, but more importantly, your practice finances as well. We do this in what we call a financial checkup. So how much can you afford to actually spend on the expansion is going to depend on several factors. And realistically, it all comes down to cash flow. So again, not just your business cash flow, but your personal cash flow as well. So lenders are going to evaluate both your practice and your personal cash flow. If you're obtaining financing to fund the expansion, the bank's equation for whether or not they're going to approve you and lend to you is fairly straightforward. At the end of the day, is there enough money in the practice to do three things? One, of course, pay the loan back that you're taking from them. Pay the existing debts, not only of the practice, but of the owner's personal debts as well. And then third, provide those owners with enough money to cover their personal living expenses over and above their current debts and their personal debts. So at the end of the day, when you peel it all back, that's all that these banks are looking at. We also need to factor in your future expenses, right? So expansion typically not only comes with increased fixed cost of equipment, construction, etc., but also variable cost as well. So are you going to be hiring a new associate? Are you going to be hiring another assistant to help you with that new operatory? We also lastly need to consider what your vision is. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we dive into the business plan in a few slides. So you might be saying to yourself, well, good, Jim, that's great. But how do I actually go about completing my financial checkup? Well, there's a couple of things that we can do from a high level to really get us started. The first, of course, that we've already talked about is starting to build that team. And Henry Schein Financial Services can be one part of that team. We can, amongst other things, connect you to a dental-specific lender to support your expansion. Secondly, this may seem rudimentary, but we always recommend that you know your credit score. So these days, that's very easy. It used to be much more difficult than it is today. So there's services out there like freecreditreport.com or Credit Karma that offer monitoring services and will show you your credit report in real time. So credit score, your personal credit score, still really drives lenders' decisions. And what I always say is, while a good credit score won't always guarantee you approval, a bad credit score can almost always hinder your ability to obtain not necessarily an approval, but certainly favorable terms and maximizing your approval. So always good, again, may seem basic, but have a good idea of what your credit score is, because that still drives a significant amount of the lender's decision. Third, we complete what we call a financial needs worksheet. So it's a type of personal financial statement and budget combined, reviewing kind of your personal net worth, your liquidity, along with your budget. Budget is going to be an extremely important piece of your practice's expansion. Again, we built some templates that you can utilize within our business plan to help you along with that process. Fourth, you want to assemble kind of the financial documents for your loan application. It's helpful to know ahead of time what these lenders are actually going to want to look at and what they're going to be assessing to make sure not only that you have them, but that they all look good and they are accurate. So most lenders are going to require a couple things. The last 2 years tax returns from the practice and you personally and the practice owners. Additionally, depending on where we are in the current year, they're going to want to see interim profit and loss statements. And it's important to ensure those profit and loss statements clearly identify the appropriate revenue and expenses, right? So most profit and loss statements that you're going to generate, let's say we're already almost halfway through the year here, the lenders are going to want to see an interim P&L through June. And we know that those are going to be management prepared. You're probably pulling them out of your practice management software or QuickBooks. But we want to make sure that they're really accurate as well. There are all too many times when we see P&Ls with large expenses that's simply categorized as kind of ask my accountant, right? We can certainly ask your accountant, but that's a signal that books may not be as accurate as the banks would like. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to be an approval, just going to be a lot more questions. So we want to make sure that you're kind of clearly understanding what they're going to need. It's fairly straightforward: an application, last 2 year tax returns, personal and business, and then an interim financial statement. And depending on the situation, banks may also require some financial projections and a budget from you. This is not always mandatory, but again, gives an indication to the bank on kind of how well you've thought through your expansion, and if there is a lack of cash flow, they may need to utilize financial projections in order to get the transaction to cash flow. So again, more on that when we talk through the business. And lastly, loan pre-qualification. So prior to going through all of this, it's important to get pre-qualified. You don't want to go down the path of building this dream up of your expansion, only to find out that you're not able to secure financing. So Henry Schein Financial Services can assist with obtaining a pre-qual. So you can save you a significant amount of time down the road if you can get pre-qualified and then go through the entire process of building out the expansion, building the blueprints, getting permission from the landlords, those types of things. So those are some brief and high-level pieces that we like to talk through when we're talking about the financial checkup. All right. So what do lenders actually look for? So we've talked through what they like to see, what documentation they're going to need, but what are they actually evaluating? So let's review that quickly. So as I mentioned, the equation is fairly simple, and it is, but there are some other ancillary factors that you should be aware of. So there are two sides of the coin that lenders are going to look into evaluate, both personal and practice. The personal side, as already mentioned, lenders are going to take a look at your credit score, but also they're going to take into consideration things like the amount of time that you've been licensed. Typically, as long as you've been licensed a year or two, lenders are going to look favorably upon. They're also going to look at your production ability. So if you've already maxed out, not only how are you going to cover your production, but how are you going to plan to cover the additional production? Are you going to need to hire an associate, right? They're going to be looking at your liquidity. So how much cash do you have on hand? Some lenders actually have liquidity requirements, some do not. They're also going to be looking at your debt. And I've kind of classified these two things as good debt versus bad debt. So lenders don't necessarily look at all debt negatively. So debt for things like real estate and other appreciating assets is traditionally looked favorably upon, as you might imagine. They also understand that there's a very good chance that there's lots of us on this line who have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans. Again, That's debt that was really required to get you where you are today, and is not necessarily looked upon negatively. Now, your your student loan payment will come into play because they are going to factor that debt into your overall cash flow, but it's not necessarily looked negatively upon. Now, bad debt, things like excess credit card debt and debt for other depreciating assets, can be a hindrance and are not favorably looked upon by the lenders. Again, doesn't necessarily disqualify you, but may lead to you not being able to obtain favorable. And lastly, your personal net worth. So of course, the sum of your assets minus your total liabilities. Again, not uncommon at all to be looking at folks who are trying to expand their practices who do not have a significant amount of personal net worth because you've been building your practice, right? You've been reinvesting in your practice. Also difficult to build personal net worth if you've got a significant amount of student loan debt. That's okay. Lenders, dental specific lenders really understand that you are building your business, you are building your personal net worth by investing into the practice, right? A big portion of your nest egg likely will be your practice's value at the end of the day. And that's what we are investing in here. On the business side, right? So lenders, again, are largely going to be basing their decision on the cash flow, but that's based off of the historical financial performance of the practice. The practice's value, or sometimes called your enterprise value, which will be utilized as collateral for the loan, which will likely include all the equipment in the practice, not just the new equipment that you're going to be purchasing. So in some scenarios, the existing debt on your practice will also need to be refinanced. They're going to be considering that into whether or not they're able to extend credit. And lastly, kind of depending on your situation, the lender may ask for, as I mentioned, financial projections. That's their way to assess kind of what you feel the growth potential is in the practice. Now, even if they don't require this, it's good practice that we go through some basic forecasting, which is a great lead into the business plan. So let's talk about that. So as I mentioned, Henry Schein Financial Services has developed a substantial business plan template for all of you to utilize. It walks you through several different things. So let's talk a little bit about what's in it, what goes into it. It perhaps kind of goes without saying that a business plan really can be kind of the foundation of your dental practice. Yet, unfortunately, too many times we see practices that simply don't have a plan at all, or create one and put it in the drawer and never review it. So a business plan should really be a living and potentially constantly changing document. So why would you build a business plan, right? You didn't go to school to build business plans. You went to school to be dentists. Well, it really provides you a structure that you can constantly reference. You know, where am I and where do I want to be? It defines your practice objectives, both from a financial and a managerial perspective. And perhaps most importantly, can save you time and money, particularly in these scenarios when you're considering expansion, by outlining your needs for the practice up front. It can also support your loan application, as I've implied several times, to ensure kind of you're maximizing your approval. Similar to pre-approval, the last thing you want to do is get into a renovation and be over budget and underfunded, right? So I've spent too much money and I didn't get approved for enough money. So actually building a business plan and then presenting it to your lender is actually a great way to make sure that you're being approved for the maximum amount that you could possibly be approved for. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to use all those funds, right? You just have them available as you're working through your expansion. So as I mentioned, we provide kind of a template for our customers that has a sample timeline for expansions. It really helps you define your target market as well. Like, who are you going after, particularly in this expansion? Are you going after a different demographic? Are you going after building a different procedures that you haven't been before? It can outlines what financial information you'll need. It also outlines kind of hiring and staffing and potential operations components. It also walks you through defining kind of a marketing strategy and practice promotions. Potentially important when you're expanding, particularly if you're going to be adding services that you haven't had previously because you are getting additional training or you're adding an additional piece of equipment that's going to allow you to keep more procedures in-house. You want to let your patient base know that. So do you have a marketing strategy in order to market the fact that you have expanded? And lastly, and potentially most importantly, provides a template for kind of your financial projections and budgeting. So let's dive in there a little bit deeper. So this is not an area that you want to overlook or really simply complete from just a basic high level. It really requires, when you sit down and do your financial projections and budgeting, an in-depth analysis of your existing practice financials. So this is going to help you assess kind of how the new expense of an expansion will affect you and your practice based on the historical financials, not your projections. Projections are nice, but they're theoretical. So once you have a look at the numbers that you can actually assess your true impact of expansion may have based on the historicals, then you can start to forecast, okay, here's how you can see even additional growth. So I think I can't reiterate enough when you're going through these exercises of budgeting and projections. One, important to be conservative. Two, it's not something that you want to take lightly. And three, I would base that decision off of the historical cash flow in the practice. So let's assume you've decided to expand, put a nice plan together. What's next? Is it actually worth it? So let's take a second to talk through some basic ROI calculations. The good news is that we can really rely on some old-fashioned business metrics. As you can see, what's on the screen now is really just a calculation. We don't need to rely on a gut feeling or some of those initial metrics or indicators that I had talked through before. We can actually do some math around this and see, does this make sense? So this is there are a lot of different financial metrics that you can use. This is just one, potentially the most basic. And again, you want to make sure you're sitting down with all of your advisors to make these decisions. But for this equation, you can simply estimate we're going to walk you through kind of how to estimate your simple return on investment. So for this equation, you can simply estimate how much new gross profit you'll make over a defined time period. Typically, when we're doing this, this is typically a 1-year period. So, and for this exercise, you consider gross profit the money that's left over after your overhead expenses are covered. As long as this number at the end of the day, and I'll walk you through an example, is positive, then in general, we can say that it's a good financial investment. So let's assume you expect to generate around $300,000 in total revenue and collections from your expansion. So you say, okay, I've got 5 ops, I'm going to 6. I think conservatively, right now I'm doing $400,000 an op, like we talked about before. I'm going to put this new op in, and let's say the first year I expect to do $300,000. Let's also assume that your practice is running a pretty healthy profit margin. So let's use 40% as a pretty healthy margin. Right? So average GP practice runs around anywhere between 30 and 40%. So that means you could generate $120,000 in profit from adding that operatory. $300,000 times 40%, $120,000 to play with. Let's also assume your expansion cost you $100,000. So between the equipment, the fit out, any tenant improvements that you need to do, let's say it's an even $100,000. 120 divided by 100, 1.2 times 100, 120%. So here we've got a very healthy return on your expansion. So this is just one way to assess ROI. There are many more out there that your team may be able to walk you through. One of which is the kind of a break-even analysis, which will tell you kind of how long it takes you to reach the point in which you're, as the name implies, breaking even on your expansion. So lots of things. This is just one way to do it. It's a quantitative way. Most people like to do that instead of relying on a gut feeling that, oh, I think I'm ready to expand, or I've reached max capacity, or we can actually put some numbers to it. Again, I would always discuss this with your CPA or your entire team. So I've certainly spent a lot of time talking about building that team. We all know we can't do this alone. More importantly, it's having that team around you that specializes in dentistry. So whether or not that's your attorney, your consultants, your equipment specialist, importantly, your lender like Henry Schein Financial Services, we want groups that specialize in this industry. It's all too often that we get folks who come to us who don't understand this industry, who are learning these things on your dime, right? You come to them and say, hey, I want to expand my practice. They've never done it before. If you're working with a contractor that's never done this, it becomes much more expensive than they're used to. Similarly, if you're working with a CPA or an accountant or a lawyer who's not familiar with the clauses in the leases that you may need to be negotiating if you're going to be expanding your practice, they need to be aware of the dental specific pieces in that lease that can set you up for success long term. So I can't reiterate enough how important it is to build the team around you. This is just one step to ensuring your long-term financial success. All right. So in summary, we kept this quick tonight. I hope you've got kind of a better understanding of some of the metrics or identifiers to review when considering an expansion. Remember, rules of thumb only take you so far. It's important to get pre-qualified with a dental specific lender to build out some basic financial projections. You can also utilize it. We just saw some basic financial calculations to determine if it is a true quality investment. And no matter kind of the situation, this still continues to be a phenomenal time to be in dentistry. So I've listed here, here are the members of my team. I encourage you to reach out. They're a team of industry experts that have been, on average, been with Henry Schein 15 years and have been in the industry even longer. They're here to act as advisors to you as you expand your practices, as you consider expanding your practices. So I'll leave this up so you can take screenshots of this if you'd like. This will also be posted traditionally on YouTube in not too long. So at that point, I think I've got, yeah, so here I'll leave this up. I won't take you through this whole thing. This is just some of the benefits that we offer from an equipment financing perspective that also can work in conjunction with your practice expansion. So Corinne, I'm not sure if we want to open it up for questions at this point, or if I see there's one question in Q&A that I can't quite see. So maybe you could help me out here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jim, for the wonderful presentation this evening. As Jim mentioned, we will open it up for Q&A. So if you do have a question, just type it on in the Q&A box over on Zoom. The question that came in just says the screenshot that they tried to take of your team came out blurry. So what we can do is we can email this to you after the fact, and we'll certainly do that, and let us know if that looks any better to you, but that looks good to me. So hopefully it's not blurry.
All right. I just made it as big as I could on my screen. So hopefully that's a little bit better.
Okay, awesome.
All right. Any additional questions?
Not yet. Maybe we leave it open just for another 30 seconds or so, just to see if any come through. I know sometimes Zoom has a little bit of a lag. right. I guess that means that you answered everyone's questions in your presentation,
Let's
Jim.
hope. Let's hope. Well, thanks, Corinne. I appreciate the time tonight. And thank you, everyone, for joining. I appreciate it. I look for more exciting webinars from Henry Schein coming soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for your
Fantastic.
time, everyone. We did record tonight's webinar and we'll email the recording out sometime in the next week. So if you want to refer back to any of this content, you certainly will be able to. And then we also will post it up on YouTube, as Jim mentioned. We also would appreciate your feedback via a survey that will pop up on your screen shortly. And again, thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Jim, if you have a minute, we actually just got a question.
I've got plenty of time. Absolutely.
Okay, sure. So the question asked, do you have a business plan template or the projections spreadsheet?
Yes, absolutely. So if you want to, the easiest way to do that is if you can see that email address on your screen right now, hsfs@henryschein.com. If you want to reach out to that and request a business plan template, please do, and we can customize one for you.
Okay, wonderful. And I just typed in that email address as well to you directly. All right. Well, it's glad we stayed on just to answer that. But anyway, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jim, so much for your time. And we look forward to seeing you on future webinars.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Have a great night.